Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today we're thinking about love and relationships poetry, and I'm going to be providing you with a complete guide to Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee, by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Before we get going, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are plenty of things on the channel to help you understand and revise love and relationships poetry. Okay, my guide to Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee. Okay, we're going to start by thinking about the poem and what it's about. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning was married to the poet Robert Browning. She wrote love poetry for him in the form of sonnets. He's the subject of her attentions in her poetry, and in Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee, her subject is compared to a tree as a way of communicating how strong and supportive he is to her, and she also manages to communicate her burning physical desire for him at the same time. So here's a reading of the poem before we think about analysing it. So Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I think of thee, my thoughts do twine and bud about thee as wild vines about a tree. Put out broad leaves and soon there's naught to see, except the straggling green which hides the wood. Yet, O my palm tree, be it understood, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee, who art dearer, better. Rather instantly renew thy presence as a strong tree should. Rustle thy boughs and set thy trunk all bare, and let these bands of greenery which ensphere thee drop heavily down, burst shattered everywhere. Because in this deep joy to see and hear thee, and breathe within thy shadow a new air, I do not think of thee, I am too near thee. And that is Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee, by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So if we're in the exam, this is how we're going to structure our response. Your first paragraph tells us how your two poems relate to a theme named in the question. Tell us what they're about, but be concise. And here's an example of that now. So Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee, was written by Elizabeth Barrett Browning for her husband, the poet Robert Browning. In the poem, the subject is compared to a tree in an extended metaphor which explores how he is strong and supportive. Barrett Browning also explores her physical desire for her subject in the poem, which has an intense tone to communicate the force of her romantic love. So that is the perfect opening to a response. If you're in the exam and you're writing about two love and relationships poems, you'd write about both poems in that introduction. And then we move on to thinking about structure. So your second paragraph tells us about the structure in each of the poems. Can you make a comment on the rhyme scheme or the metre of each poem? Here's an example of that for Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee. Barrett Browning's choice of sonnet form would have served to showcase her appreciation of literary heritage, given that her subject, Robert Browning, was a successful poet. The use of rhyming couplets and iambic pentameter could reflect the order and structure he has brought to her life, which also reflects the imagery of a tree, unmovable and secure. And then once we've done that, we're moving on to analysing language. In front of you now is a flashcard that you're welcome to snip and keep for the poem. We've got an idea of the themes and structure, but I'm going to take you through the 4 key quotes from the poem that I would be using to analyse if I was in the exam. So we've got my thoughts do twine and bud about thee as wild vines about a tree. So she sees her subject as a tree in this metaphor, strong and supporting, and it elicits thoughts of physical intimacy and touch as well. The idea of her being a wild vine about him has got allusions to their physical intimacy there. We've got breathe within thy shadow a new air. So shadows are often a symbol for death, perhaps. For the speaker, even the shadow of the subject is associated with life and beauty. She also says, thee who art dearer, better. There's almost a frantic tone here created by that exclamation midway through the sonnet, this use of caesura there. And this reflects her obsessive and compulsive nature, perhaps. And we've got classic little line from the poem, set thy trunk all bare. The subject is compared to a tree in this extended metaphor, strong and supporting, but this moment also could allude to her sexual desire for her subject. So here are a few things that you can do to aid your revision. Answer these 5 questions, do that in full sentences to aid you. Who is the speaker and what's their frame of mind in the poem? What's a key use of language in the poem and what does it communicate? You should be able to remember and recall 4 key quotes from each of the poems in the cluster. What structure does the poem have and what effect does this have? So you should be able to recall the structural choices made by the writer. What ideas about love does the poem communicate and what's the context of the poem? Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content. Feel free to ask something you'd like to see me cover in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share and keep revising.